ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and welcome to our DGAP morning briefing on geopolitical challenges. I'm Henning Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik Quarterly. This morning, we will once again focus on Russia's war against Ukraine, which President Vladimir Putin launched on February the 24th. In 11 days, we will pass the eight-month mark. Putin's illegal annexation of the Ukrainian regions of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk was condemned yesterday night by the United Nations. 143 nations supported the motion. Only 4 voted with Russia, Belarus, Nicaragua, Syria, and North Korea. 35 countries abstained, including China and India. On the battlefield, the Ukrainians continue to make small gains, particularly in Kherson. They also, we believe, launched a spectacular blow last Saturday with a huge explosion on the Kerch Bridge. There were also attacks on Russian logistic hubs. The Kremlin responded with a resumption of terror bombing Ukrainian cities, playgrounds, university buildings, and so on, including in the capital Kyiv, damaging electricity grids and other civilian infrastructure. Some analysts believe that the attacks had been planned for later this year, but were brought forward to revenge the Kerch Bridge attack. Ukraine's supporters responded by promising more military help. The United Kingdom announced the delivery of Amran air-to-air missiles. France said it would send air defense systems and missiles, as well as more Caesar howitzers. The first air defense IRIS-T system arrived from Germany on Tuesday, and 3 more are to follow, though probably next year. Berlin also promised more Panzerhaubitze 2000s and Mars 2 rocket launches. After the 6th meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, also known as the Ramstein Group, of 48 defense ministers, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke of excellent progress this week. After the first summit of the European Political Community, or EPC, in Prague, which we discussed last week, French President Emmanuel Macron announced a 100 million fund to help Ukraine buy weapons. The EU military training mission for Ukraine is also finally becoming operational. As the EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said on Monday in his speech to EU ambassadors, this mission was discussed already before Russia launched its attack. Quote, "And now we are doing it quickly," said Borrell. Well, quickly for European standards means a couple of months, unquote. To discuss all this and more, we are joined by 3 experts this morning to discuss the situation. In order of appearance, I have the great pleasure of welcoming back my DGAP colleague, Dr. András Rácz, Senior Fellow at the International Order and Democracy Program here at the German Council on Foreign Relations. And of course, an expert on the Russian military. He will once again brief us on the military situation. Good morning, András.
Good morning, Henning.
Another very interesting outcome of the EPC meeting in Prague last Thursday were direct contacts taking place between Armenia and Azerbaijan, who had clashed once more militarily in summer, with Macron and European Council President Charles Michel acting as mediators. There are also plans for a European civilian mission to the countries. We will thus focus on the Black Sea region in the second part of our briefing with my DGAP colleague, Dr. Stefan Meister, who leads the International Order and Democracy Program, sharing his assessment of the geopolitical challenges the EU is facing in the Black Sea region, which is presently being reshaped by the war. Good morning, Stefan.
Good morning.
And last but certainly not least, we will be hearing from Viola von Cramon, member of the European Parliament for the Greens. She's a long-time observer of Ukraine, but also of the Black Sea region as a whole, and will provide a Brussels perspective. Good morning. Each speaker will have about 6 to 7 minutes for their remarks. We will be opening up for your questions and comments after roughly 30 minutes. For the Q&A, please raise your hand or use the chat functions of Zoom. Please note that this meeting will be recorded and that we have close on time, especially today, maybe even a little bit ahead of time, since 2 of our panelists need to need to move on quickly afterwards. At this point, I would like to thank my colleague Milan Nitsch, the DGAP's Central and Eastern European expert, who has been instrumental in organizing the DGAP morning briefings. And now, to start us off, let's turn to András.
Thank you very much, Henning. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us again on this Thursday morning. And as usual, please allow me to share my screen and to show you the map of the conflict prepared by the Institute for the Study of War. Now you are supposed to see the map of the Kharkiv region and how the Ukrainian counteroffensive has progressed. Since our last military briefing, Ukraine regained considerable territories here in the Kharkiv region. They managed to thwart Russia's plans to use the Oskil River as a defensive line because Ukrainian troops managed to quickly cross the Oskil, and right now they are pushing towards the key logistical hub, the city of Crimea. These kind of dotted lines, these indicate the main Russian logistical routes. Now with Ukrainian forces approaching Crimea, they are threatening directly two of the key logistical routes Russia is using to supply the Donbass, and also some of the other logistical routes are already in range for Ukraine's artillery. So Russia's logistical situation here in this region is getting increasingly hard. However, here Russians are apparently able to kind of solidify their defenses, so the progress of the Ukrainian counterattack has been slowed down a bit. It was also mentioned that Ukraine gained considerable territories back also in the Western Front, in the Kherson region. Here you see the map of the Kherson region. Russians are retreating in an organized way from this northwestern part of the Kherson region, and Ukraine keeps pushing them back towards Kherson and on the long run, hopefully, to the other side of the river Dnipro. However, here in the Kherson region, Russians have well-established multi-layered defense lines. So here, any kind of collapse is unlikely. It's more probable that Ukraine will continue this slow, meticulous advance based on basically destroying Russia's logistical and supply chains, and thereby making the position of the Russian forces in Kherson unsustainable. But now I stop the sharing and say a few more information about a number of other things. It made quite an echo in the international media that Belarus and Russia have been intensifying their military cooperation. Some people interpreted that they are creating a joint army. Well, they aren't. What's happening in reality is that there is a thing called Regional Group of Forces, which is a framework established for closer military cooperation between the armed forces of Russia and Belarus. This regional group of forces is to be activated only in times of war, and once activated, it results that the Belarusian army becomes under Russia's command. Now what we see is basically this partial activation of this framework, of this regional group of forces. The good news is that this doesn't mean that the Belarusian army would enter Ukrainian territory. At least not officially. The Belarusian army is unfit for any kind of real combat task. Instead, what's happening is first, Russia is taking away the heavy equipment of the Belarusian army, because the Belarusian army possesses huge numbers of heavy weaponry, more than 500 tanks, nearly 1,000 infantry fighting vehicles. So Belarus has the military hardware that Russia is increasingly missing, lacking due to the combat losses. So Russia is basically devouring the military hardware of Belarus. That's one thing. And second, in order to train the hundreds of thousands of mobilized Russian men, Russia is likely to use also the training grounds in Belarus, because Russia's own training ground capabilities are just not sufficient for training so many men. So it's unlikely that we would see the regular Belarusian army entering Ukraine territory. Third thing, strike on the Kerch Bridge. Besides its unquestionable political significance, anyways, a nice birthday present to Vladimir Putin celebrating his 70th birthday. The strike on the bridge constitutes a major logistical problem for Russia's forces. The Kerch Bridge was the single such railway connection between mainland Russia and the Kherson front, which had a two-track railway line. Now with the bridge damaged, because even though Russians claim that the railway line is intact, it's not. I mean, this is a metal structure on which several tanker wagons of diesel fuel have been burning for several hours. The structure is severely damaged and deformed, so it's quite unlikely that Russia would be able to restore railway connection to its full capacity anytime soon. This constitutes major logistical problem for the Russian forces, particularly in the Kherson region. As it was already mentioned by Henning, officially as a retaliation for the Kerch Bridge attack, Russia launched a major wave of strikes against Ukraine's civilian and particularly energy infrastructure. Strikes started on Sunday. Monday was the most intensive day with more than 80 missiles launched and with a smaller operational pace, but Russia maintained the strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure also on Tuesday. As it was said already, I fully agree with the assessment. This was not a spontaneous retaliatory attack. This was well planned, this was well prepared. The targeting job has probably taken several weeks, if not months, to prepare. Still, Russia now decided to execute these attacks. A few takeaways. First, Ukraine's air defense performed really, really well. They shot down nearly half of the incoming Russian missiles and also a considerable number of the Iranian-made suicide drones Russia has been using. Still, the other half inflicted considerable damage on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, particularly regarding Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, and a number of other cities. So if Russia maintains these attacks on the energy infrastructure, several Ukrainian cities are likely to face a very, very harsh winter. It's yet too early to define whether Russia is going to continue striking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, but from their perspective, it would actually be a logical step to take. Such a systematically degrading Ukraine's civilian infrastructure would fit very much into the pattern of Russia's increasingly radical way of waging war, manifested already in the fake referenda, in the partial mobilization, in the annexation, and now with this in the strikes on the energy infrastructure. So I'm afraid that this is likely to go on. Last thing, even though Russian officials and also unofficial faces like TV presenters, all that, they regularly keep talking about the need for a nuclear escalation. Ramzan Kadyrov said that a tactical nuclear bomb should be dropped on Kiev. So far, there are no visible signs of Russia actually preparing for a nuclear strike, neither on a strategic level nor on the tactical level. Good news here from the perspective of whether there's going to be a nuclear strike. If you remember, the Kerch Bridge was already named as a red line by several Russian officials. During the summer, many of them said that if Ukraine hits the Kerch Bridge, then the Armageddon will be unleashed, the flames of Armageddon will just go up. Well, the Kerch Bridge was hit, and Russia's reaction was pretty conventional. Russia reacted by a normal conventional escalation. No use of tactical weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, no use of any new weapons of mass destruction. So hopefully, even though the risk of a nuclear escalation is still higher than ever since a very long time, it's still not an acute danger. It's highly unlikely that Russia would rely on using nuclear weapons here in this moment or anytime soon. Paradoxically enough, it's the partial mobilization is one of the indicators. Because if Russia decides to mobilize 300,000 men, taking up all the political consequences, economic consequences as well, and Russia is getting weapons from Belarus, trying to get ammunition from North Korea, all these indicate that Moscow calculates that they can still solve the conflict, win the conflict probably, by conventional means. And if they calculate that they can win by conventional means, there is no need for an actual nuclear escalation. Of course, they will keep talking about using a nuclear weapon in order to have an informational deterrence on us. However, I think that an actual use of a nuclear weapon is still highly unlikely. That's it from me for the start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, András. It's always very fascinating and well, from I would say good news that you think the nuclear danger is not as pronounced as some have recently written. Let's move on to Stefan, please, with an assessment of the geopolitical challenges the Black Sea region poses for the EU.
Thank you, Henning. Just one sentence also as a follow-up what András was saying. Still, I would say, if you look into the discourse in Russia, if you see how the hardliners are driving the discourse, and Putin has to react to this, I think there is a kind of an escalation spiral also in Russia itself, and Putin has to show that he is strong. And I see here also a danger that there can be a further escalation, that I think I agree with András, we are not there at the moment in terms of nuclear, definitely not. But I think the red line could be, for instance, Crimea. Yeah, so I think, and then it's the question how this internal discourse is going on if Russia will further lose territory. But I think that's something to be discussed. Shifting to the topic I want to discuss, I just wanted to say we also wanted to use this format to widen the scope and to look into the geopolitical changes as the result of the war. And I think one of the key changes is the acceleration of the disintegration of the post-Soviet space. So I think Russia will lose its empire now finally with this war. And I think that's very important to look into also for the EU, because it's also about our neighborhood and stability in our neighborhood. And the question is, who will provide stability in the future, and what are the other actors who are there? And that's why I think the Black Sea region, South Caucasus, and then also connecting with the Caspian region and Central Asia is really a key region for the EU. And I think we need really a broader strategic discussion also about this. So if we're looking into the major trends since 2014, with the annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass, we could see a comprehensive Russian military build-up in the Black Sea region. So Russia was changing the security balance systematically in the Black Sea region, and has become the dominant security player in this region. The war in Ukraine aims on cutting off Ukraine from the Black Sea completely. So we should remind that after 2014, it was about Azov Sea, which was already very important also. And there was a very weak reaction from the Western side. I think that was also a signal to Putin, okay, I can maybe take more. And I think this Russian military dominance was or is still a new reality in the Black Sea region. The main Russian goal is to keep the West out and to be the dominant security player accepted as such by all littoral states. I think that's the same strategy Russia was developing in the Caspian Sea also. Moscow has here a bigger picture. It is linking the Caspian and Black Sea region, which is important for energy transit, a springboard to the Middle East, and important for economic and military supply of North Africa, Syria, while linking Black Sea with the Mediterranean Sea. So you cannot just see the Black Sea as a single sea, but it is linking different very important strategic, very important regions and countries which each other, which are also part of the EU and have an impact also on the security of the EU. And Russia can reach from the Black Sea all European states militarily. Crimea is the center for deployment of troops for Syria. So I think the centrality also of Crimea for Russian military action into the Middle East cannot be underestimated. The West has over years underestimated the strategic importance of the Black Sea region, and Russia could increase its military presence and leverage on the countries of the region. Looking into the South Caucasus, what we can see is that third powers are coming into the region, like Turkey, and increasingly also China, and Iran is already there. Turkey used its support for Azerbaijan in the Second Karabakh War in 2022 to increase its leverage on Russia, on other regions or topics like Syria, Kurds, and Libya. So we see a bargaining also between Russia and Turkey, and the South Caucasus is a key region for both with this regard. But it's also about other issues. Turkey is challenging Russia also with its weapon supply for Ukraine and for Azerbaijan. At the same time, it does not support sanctions against Russia and needs cheap gas from Russia, and is doing also trade with Moscow. It's even supporting circumventing also sanctions. The Second Karabakh War was a game changer for the South Caucasus and the neighborhood of the EU. The importance of this war, I think, is still not recognized from our side. I think it's one of the key wars of the past decades. It can, because the main message is it can be successful to solve a conflict with a war if you have sophisticated weapons and the support of a major power like Turkey. And I think that's a very negative precedent for peaceful and multilateral conflict solution mechanism for which normally the EU and our collective security systems are standing. Russia has now, in the third country of the South Caucasus, troops on the ground with these so-called peace forces in Karabakh, which increases its leverage on Azerbaijan and also on the other South Caucasus states. Armenia is completely dependent on the decisions of other states, namely Russia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. The main interesting trend we have to look is the future of Azerbaijani-Russian relations and Turkish-Russian relations, also with regard to energy supply from the Caspian region to Europe. Russia has involved Azerbaijan in different formats with Turkey and Iran, and it's at the same time undermining multilateral formats like the OSCE Minsk Group with the agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan after the war provided by Russia. At the same time, the weakening of Russia in Ukraine opens a window for Azerbaijan to put Armenia militarily under pressure and to get a peace agreement under its conditions and a corridor through Armenia to its exclave Nakhchivan. So we see that the weakening of Russia is trying to be used by Azerbaijan to find a solution with its main aims. Russia is either not willing or able to guarantee the territorial integrity of Armenia. And at the same time, Azerbaijan's leverage towards the EU is growing as a supplier of gas and oil, and it could become an important transit route for energy resources from Central Asia. The transit route and connectivity between Caspian and Black Sea will become a major issue in the next years with the goal to circumvent Russia. So we can now already see how overstretched is the Georgian infrastructure, for instance, to the Black Sea, and how more and more transit and export is going through this region. What all this means for the EU and the US, I think ignoring more or less Russian activities in the Black Sea region in the past years and disengagement in the Second Karabakh War has strengthened Russia's role in the region and was one precondition also for this war. I think that's, for me, one of the key lessons learned. Russia was so strong because we were more or less absent and provided these gaps also where Russia could step in. And the lesson learned for Russia was we can do more. And I think this lesson needs to be learned. Although Russia's war in Ukraine weakens its ability to act in the South Caucasus and other post-Soviet countries, Moscow will have sufficient spoiler capacities and stay the key security player in the region, at least for the time being. But it is weakened in the region and challenged also by other players. There's a big question mark if collective security with multilateral formats like the OSCE Minsk Group and the OSCE as an institution can survive. And if not, I think the EU needs to fill the gap and be more present in conflict with monitoring and peacekeeping missions. Russia is losing influence in Central Asia, the South Caucasus, and Eastern Europe with the war in Ukraine. And if the EU is not more active in this neighborhood, other states will shape the regions and create a new regional orders. And we can see this with China and Central Asia, becoming more and more active, and Turkey in the South Caucasus and the Black Sea region. I think Russia is not able to provide stability in the region anymore. And therefore, it is in the interest of the EU member states to engage here more and to take ownership in these regional conflicts. And I think it's a very positive step that Jean-Michel is negotiating here also between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and that the EU is also willing to send and able to send a monitoring mission to the Armenian-Azerbaijani border. Hopefully not only for 2 months, but for longer. So, but we can see that there is more engagement from the EU. There is an understanding that there is instability, and that the EU has to play a bigger role. So I stop here.
Thank you very much, Stefan. If you want to read more about this, I recommend the next issue of Internationale Politik, where you find an article Stefan has written on exactly that subject, out in about 2 weeks. But let's now move on to Viola von Cramon for her take.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. And indeed, where Stefan has ended, to blame the EU for being not present and being too absent, this is absolutely true. When we saw the beginning of the war in 2020, it was, of course, the peak of Corona, and we from the European Parliament regretted it extremely that we were not able to have any kind of shuttle diplomacy, but that also our diplomats, neither our special envoy for the South Caucasus nor anyone else from the Council or Commission has picked up the phone or went there and installed any kind of a task force mission roundtable or something. So, of course, as Stefan has said, that opened the space as it was open before for Russia, but also for Turkey. And especially for Armenia, this was extremely unsatisfying. And the poor Armenians, they were trying to reach out to all of us here in the European Union on different channels, but there was rather, let's say, a very limited response from our side, nor was there a will to even engage in a more robust way. So with the war now in Ukraine, with the Russian war in Ukraine, I mean, if there is any positive side effect, it is the possibility now for the EU to step into this little, let's say, open door. You have probably seen the pictures during the European Political Community meeting recently in Prague. And I think it was, I mean, we were all very critical about this format as such and why it is needed. But honestly, I have to admit, in the end, if this serves as an umbrella for different, let's say, conflict mediation procedures, such as Kosovo-Serbia dialogue, but also maybe this now Armenia-Azerbaijan mediation and conflict sustainable peace agreement creation or something like that, I think this also serves the purpose. And that's a good opportunity also, for example, that Prime Minister Pashinyan has met the Turkish president for the first time, and things like that happened as they just drank tea together on one of the workshop events. So what I want to say is, I think the EU finally took up a little bit of this leadership, which was requested, especially by Armenia, for quite some time. I think Stefan has rightly explained also the role of Turkey now in the Black Sea. And of course, it is not in our interest, neither it's in anyone's interest, that Turkey more or less takes over Russia's role and pushes back everyone else. So it is good that finally we stepped up to that. And also one has to understand what was also new for me, that there is no international borders so far properly demarcated between Armenia and Azerbaijan. That makes it extremely easy now, and it's abused by Azerbaijan to work with different maps. So especially Azerbaijan works with maps from the 1800s. And they just claiming this is our territory, and the shelling goes from from Azerbaijan in ground, but deep into Armenian territory, deep into Armenian soil. And especially, of course, they would like to have this corridor to their enclave Nakhchivan. But this is absolutely unacceptable for Armenia. So we have been with our AFET Commission, with our Committee for Foreign Affairs on the ground at the end of July to all three countries, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. And it was really interesting to see how much the Armenians would be ready to invest into a sustainable peace. And they, I mean, I cannot disclose everything, but I was really impressed by this young leadership, by especially also the female participation of many of my colleagues from the parliament, but also other actors on the ground, how much they would be ready to sell any kind of a peace agreement, which would be extremely difficult for them, but really to achieve something. But of course, a new, let's say, cut off of their own territory is absolutely unacceptable. That is for sure. So what Armenia asked from the European Union is to have any kind of observation mission. Of course, requested on both sides, on the Azeri side and on the Armenian side. That was not agreed on, so there was no chance for the EU at that moment to have a mission on Azeri and Armenian border side. So at the moment, it is only a civil mission. It's limited for 2 months, and it's only limited to the Armenian side. I think that is a good start. The inspiration for this mission comes from the European monitoring mission of Georgia, but also the EUM from Ukraine. The question now is, because it's needed urgently, how to implement that without having own staff, and how to get people on the ground there, while of course everyone knows to set up a civil mission in the South Caucasus at the moment will not be easy. So they were thinking of taking part or partly the staff from the EUMM mission from Georgia. But I think this is also being withdrawn already. So at the moment, it seems to be a complete, full and new contingent, which will be hopefully be set up in a few weeks. But this is not an easy, let's say, task, so to say. But what we can say is for sure that is a weakening of the Russian influence. It's a weakening of the Turkish influence. It's hopefully the opportunity that the European Union is just not there to pay. Where normally we always jump in and do all the humanitarian stuff, the supporting of civil society and a lot of economical support, regional development, but hopefully in the end we can also have a better political saying and more political influence for a sustainable peace and development on the ground. And hopefully, I mean, Stefan has mentioned that with our dependence, or newly dependence on Azerbaijan, we need to develop also a greater leverage on Azerbaijan, because otherwise, I see this on the human rights side, we see this on media independence, opposition, repression. I mean, Azerbaijan is and was almost an autocracy and dictator like Belarus, and it's extremely difficult, of course, for us to influence the domestic development, while on the one hand, we ask them for any kind of peace agreement and for a higher percentage and a greater quantity of oil and gas at the moment, which is as we all know, highly needed at the moment in all the European member states. So this is what I would like to give you for the moment, but there are many more things to say, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for this insightful comment on what's going on right now. We can now open for questions and comments. Please raise your hands. It's the easiest way to put your question to the panelists. And while we're waiting for you to collect your thoughts, maybe one quick question to Viola von Cramon and a follow-up. Stefan has made the point also that what's lacking on the EU side is also this sort of a strategic view of the region, that sort of capacities apart, which clearly are not sufficient. There's also missing a kind of understanding of the importance of this region. Would you agree with that?
Well, obviously, I mean, we have a socialist Spanish high representative who struggled quite a lot to even differentiate between Armenia and Azerbaijan and get the names in place and everything. So it took some time, I think, for some of the, let's say, leading figures in the European Union to even get their maps right. And on top of that, I think we were for quite some time always there to please people, not to be in conflict, especially with Azerbaijan. There was no strategic approach whatsoever how to deal with this region. I mean, now we come up with this global gateway. We have the connectivity strategy. We are really working also on this infrastructure project, such as the port of Baku. We are speaking to Kazakhstan. We are speaking to Georgia. There's really this alternative route now, but nevertheless, I think, as I said before, we have to put more pressure, much more pressure, also for our own credibility on the human rights, on the civil society, on opposition, media freedom, and so on. I mean, we tick all the boxes, but in reality, we do not deliver. And that is extremely sad to see for many people in Azerbaijan, for example.
Thank you very much. Maybe Stefan, do you want to come in on this as well? And maybe I can give you one question from the chat by James Willie. He's asking about whether that wouldn't mean that that is the risk of EU sort of strategic overstretch, sort of in a way, sort of can the EU really do everything, or at least sort of focus on that region?
I would take this maybe focusing on this question. I think for me, it's a question, it's not only a question of ambitions, but it's also a question of who will shape the neighborhoods of the EU in the future. So on one hand, Russia is becoming weaker, but still has these kind of spoiler capacities, and it is a key security player in the Black Sea region. On the other hand, we can see powers like Turkey, China, Iran are shaping more and more these neighborhoods. And I think it's not a question if the EU is overstretching itself, but I think it's a need to build up also more capacities to be able to act in these regions. I think, and I think it's important that we have now the candidate status for Ukraine and for Moldova and the potential candidate status for Georgia. But I think there should be also a European perspective for Armenia. Yeah, so I think and I think that should be very clear. So we see here really fundamental shifts in terms of stability, security, geopolitics, geoeconomics in this region. And I think it is about a need also of the EU to become more active, to have a comprehensive strategy. We're discussing resilience, we're discussing connectivity, we're discussing also soft security. And I think we need now to follow up on this. We need to have capacities for monitoring missions, for peace missions. I think I don't see that someone else, or is the UN stepping in here and will do this? Will there not? Yeah, and I think I'm rather skeptical about the UN Security Council. So I also understand that this is not only about the Black Sea and the South Caucasus, it's also about the Western Balkans. Yeah, so I think we cannot just say either we do this or that. and I also understand that we have limited capacities, but we have to start on one point to build up these capacities. And I think this is what I would argue for. I think these regions are crucial, strategically crucial. They are important. They're becoming more important for energy supply, for connectivity to Asia also. And you cannot just say, oh, we don't have resources for this at the moment. We have to concentrate on something else. Yeah. So, and I think that needs to be systematically built up. Henning, can I ask one question? I want to ask one question also to András, just to use this opportunity.
Please go ahead, and then Klaus Wittmann has already raised his hand.
Yeah, how this mobilization in Russia will shift the balance of power in short and in middle term. Just where's the effect? I just wanted to ask you of this mobilization we see now.
Thank you. There are four main question marks regarding the mobilization. The first one, of course, is the morale of the mobilized forces. Because anybody who wanted to fight already joined the Russian army, either as a contracted soldier or a volunteer. These mobilized people are there not because of their will, but because they were forced to be there. And based on the information we have from the front line, many of them are trying to surrender as soon as possible. So morale is one question. And the second question is the training, because the Russia's whole mobilization system has been designed to handle the annual conscription waves, right? Russia still has conscription, both in the autumn and in the spring. They conscript around 130,000 soldiers. So 130,000 at once. However, now the same system is supposed to handle an additional 300,000 on top of the conscripts. Of course, the mobilization system is unable to cope with the challenge. So it's really not seen how the mobilized soldiers would get the proper training. I mean, for a regular infantryman, the basic kind of refreshing training should be 4 to 6 weeks. If somebody serves in a specialized forces, artillery, communication, engineering, sapper, tanks, whatever, that's more 6 to 8 weeks. We just don't see that Russia would have the training capacity for that. Third, equipment. Russia has suffered serious problems with properly equipping even its professional forces and contracted forces during the war. Now it's really not seen whether Russia would be able to equip an additional 300,000 soldiers. That's why we have those really scary information that the mobilized men are asked to buy everything for themselves. Backpack, sleeping bags, winter clothing, first aid kits, everything, because the army is unable to provide it. So equipment and also weaponry is the third question. And the fourth question, officers. Who will lead these people? From where will Russia get the officers and non-commissioned officers necessary for leading all these forces? I mean, Russian officer corps has already suffered serious losses in Ukraine. We have confirmed information of more than 1,000 officers already killed in the Ukrainian front. And I mean, replacing an officer, it takes several years. You need to train these men, you need to give these men experience. I really don't see that Russia would have the necessary number of extra numbers of officers and non-commissioned officers for properly leading these mobilized forces. So to sum it up, I don't think that this mobilization would be a game changer. Instead, it's likely to become kind of more of the same, but a lot more of the same. So basically, it's for extending the war in terms of time, but because of these four main question marks, morale, training, equipment, leadership, I don't really see that Russia would be able to open, let's say, a new front against Ukraine. Instead, they will keep pushing, at least in my opinion, they will keep pushing for the Donbass and also for maintaining control over the territory which they are currently holding. But I don't see that this mobilization would be a game changer, at least not at the present stage. I hope this goes for an answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, András. Maybe one very quick final question on that. Sort of what role does the weather play, or the sort of the winter coming? Is that makes it sort of, many seem to assume that this will sort of slow down things anyway. Is that correct?
The incoming winter, and particularly the period of the autumn rains, which in Russian called Rasputitsa, meaning like when the roads disappear. It will slow down both sides. However, it will cause more problems for the Russians because their logistical lines are longer. And particularly now with the train connection damaged, Russians will have to rely more on supply trucks instead of trains. So the incoming bad weather will slow this down. And when the real winter arrives, both armies will suffer, of course, but most suffering will fall on the Russian mobilized forces. And remember the beginning of the war. What was the cover story for the lineup? A winter exercise. And thousands of Russian soldiers spent 3-4 weeks out in the field in January, preparing for the attack. Back in January, February, it was visible that Russia was unable to provide proper winter equipment, even for its professional forces. Who will equip the 300,000 mobilized soldiers? It's just not seen. I mean, there are Russian crowdfunding campaigns trying to buy at least winter boots for the soldiers because the army is not providing anything. At the same time, of course, Ukraine also needs winter equipment, but Ukraine is getting a lot of international help. To just give you one example, it was Canada yesterday. The Canadian Armed Forces offered 500,000, 500,000 winter clothing sets. This is a lot. So Ukraine is likely to get proper winter equipment from her Western allies. However, I don't really see who would supply Russia's mobilized soldiers.
Thank you very much, András. I think it's high time now to get into a few questions. Klaus Wittmann was the first to raise his hand. Two more, and I would also like to encourage Professor Miklej, if you want to put your point in person to the panel, that would also be great. But let's start with Klaus Wittmann, please.
Good morning. I would like to thank the DGAP for these regular updates. They are very useful, and I found fascinating the geopolitical perspective by Stefan Meister. But I have a detailed question to András. What do you know about the Russian stocks of cruise missiles, drones, ammunition? Because I think British services say they are running out of ammunition. They cannot keep up the frequency of their air attacks. What do you know?
Thank you very much. Let's collect maybe two more questions. There's one from Javid Nazirli.
This is not a question. I have some remarks.
Okay.
I would like to make some remarks. Thank you, first of all, for holding these discussions, which also cover the topic of Armenia-Azerbaijan issue. And first of all, it is another good opportunity for us to reiterate here as well our appreciation to the European Union for its support for the negotiation process between Azerbaijan and Armenia under the post-conflict realities, directed to reach a peace agreement, a lasting peace agreement. These new realities...
Yeah. Before you continue, could you just introduce yourself, since we don't know? Yeah.
Yes, my name is Javid Nazirli. I'm consul of Azerbaijani embassy in Berlin.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. These new realities are, first of all, restoration of our sovereignty over our territories, sovereignty over the border with Armenia, and even 132 kilometers of our borders with Iran. On the 7th of October, almost 1 week ago, Armenia and Azerbaijan confirmed their commitment to the Charter of the United Nations and the Almaty 91 Declaration, through which both recognized each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty and agreed to work on the text of a peace agreement and delimitation of our border. That was a beautiful day for Azerbaijan and Armenia and our peace-loving people. But it was a really tragic day for all those who work hard against peace, including many conflict profiteering foreign politicians and so-called experts. So unfortunate to say. Coming to the looking for possible linkages between the war in Ukraine and the tensions of Azerbaijan-Armenia border, I can only decisively assure you that there is no any kind of linkage at all. Any statements and allegations of that kind can only harm the current atmosphere of normalization and aggravate the situation. We invite and ask all stakeholders to be focused on the positive track of post-conflict normalization. And of course, it is hard to avoid any tensions at all after the 30-year history of that conflict. However, these tensions are a result of sabotage of those forces which are not satisfied with today's normalization agenda. We're now closer to lasting peace than ever since the eruption of that conflict in the late 80s. The situation today is very sensitive and delicate. With all these points in mind, we call upon all stakeholders, including the academicians, the academic institutions, instead of the allegations against Azerbaijan and calling for any kind of leverages and pressure against my country, which is absolutely baseless, to express their support for the ongoing peace-building process, including the work on the text of the peace agreement and the delimitation and markation of the state border with Armenia. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Point taken. Maybe Stefan wants to respond, and maybe Viola as well. And let's take Milanic as well, and then we have another round of answers, please.
Good morning to all. I would like to ask the panelists for their assessment of the results of the inaugural summit of the European Political Community in Prague, as we discussed it last week. It seems to me that at the time where other security formats or organizations, political organizations for wider Europe are not working, OSCE or Council of Europe, that this was a very timely sort of rendezvous to discuss other things than Ukraine, including the looming sort of conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And specifically, I would like to focus on the role of Turkey and President Erdogan. For diplomats who took part in Prague, in the briefings that I had, they said that Erdogan really wants to be a peacemaker, that they were clear from informal meetings. He wants to play a role in the Russia-Ukraine war as a peacemaker. Also, he needs to alter his dynamics as he's facing a very uncertain re-election at home next year.
Thank you very much. Maybe we go first to Viola von Cramon, and feel free to pick up points you would like to address.
Well, I mean, this European political community was highly, let's say, skeptical, welcomed by many of us, and questions by whether we need this double format, is that another OSCE, Council of Europe, whatsoever. But I think in the time of the crisis, where we see that we should unite all European forces, including the South Caucasus, Ukraine, Moldova, and especially the countries of the Western Balkan, Mr. Vučić included, I think it makes sense to build a united front and to see this as an umbrella and not as a permanent waiting room for some of the candidate countries who wish to join the European Union in the near future and not in this waiting room forever. So I think there was a lot of skepticism at the beginning, but as you said, the kickoff was rather smoothly and was welcomed. I talked to many ambassadors from Ukraine, Moldova, and many others here during the last days, and they said actually it was really use and worth joining and having this side talk. So I think that is, in the end, maybe a good compensation of the existing formats. Regarding the remarks from the gentleman of the Azerbaijani embassy, yes, of course. I mean, territorial integrity is absolutely the state of play, and this is what is respected from all of us. But that does not mean that if you cannot achieve this territorial integrity, you have to start with another military attack, and especially when things are not settled in advance, as I said, with the demarcation of international borders, which needs to be, I think, prepared very carefully, hopefully with the support of the European Union and other actors, and many more things. And building peace and stability, but also trust and rehabilitation or reconciliation will need time, but some of the rhetoric coming from Baku during the last weeks and months are not too helpful for that. And as I said, I think from our understanding, the Armenian side is really, really ready to give a lot of political capital to convince their own population for any kind of a compromise, but of course not for cutting off another piece of land. I think this is simply unacceptable, but everything else, I think you need both sides. And from that, we hear sometimes rather rough tones and a rough rhetoric from Baku, and things like this exhibition of soldiers in the park of Baku are not too helpful either.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Stefan.
Yeah, maybe on the same issue, I would disagree with the colleague. I think there are links between the war in Ukraine and also weakening of Russia and this escalation also on the Armenian-Azerbaijani border and in this conflict. I see a weakened Russia. I see that Russia has also deployed parts of its sophisticated troops from the peace forces, the so-called peace forces, to Ukraine. We see a very slow reaction if there are any incidents from the Russian side, I think there is this discourse also from the Azerbaijani side of strength and that we can do things at this point. I think this is not challenging the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. I think we agree here, and also Prime Minister Pashinyan is agreeing on this. So I think that's something which is clear. But I don't think that you can create peace with violence. I think that's a problem, and I don't want to blame here only Azerbaijan as the main problem. If you look into the past, in the genesis of this conflict, I think we had violence from both sides, but we have all these hatreds also in the societies, and that makes it so difficult also domestically to sign a peace agreement, to agree also on certain kind of conditions for the Karabakh Armenians. So I think I don't think that this is a clever policy also from the Azerbaijani side, also to put Pashinyan so much under pressure. I think you will not get a better better person who is willing to sign this kind of agreement, and I think there is a instability and destabilization also of domestic policy. I think that was also asked here in the chat through this whole situation, and I think we all have no interest. I think there is in further destabilization, so there is an interest in signing a peace agreement in the end, having really border limitations between both countries, and having also guarantees for Karabakh Armenians, so inside of the Azerbaijani state, so, and I think I don't see that this will be so easily implemented with the situation, with the tense situation we have at the moment, and with a further destabilization also of Armenia. There was another question on the new era of double standards. If the EU is really willing to be maybe a bigger player in the region, and is it not because of the interest in oil and gas, not in maybe not mentioning also human rights issues and other standards. I think there is this threat, that there is a kind of double standards, and there is a kind of how to say that because we need these resources now, we might be not so engaged, yeah, on other issues. But I think that's not decided, yeah. So I think there was this visit of Ursula von der Leyen to Baku where human rights were not mentioned. That was criticized also. At the same time, I think it's really important that Charles Michel is engaging here, is providing this facilitation platform, and is also being kind of an honest bargainer. But you need then also to provide monitoring mission, maybe possible peacekeeping to underline this. And I think for me, the main challenge for Azerbaijan is to get an agreement internationally legitimized and recognized. And I think that's something where the EU and also international actors can play a more important role, because the format we have now also with Russia is not internationally recognized. And then that's the question how any agreement will get legitimization. I think that needs more an internationalization of the conflict than a regionalization of the conflict, which we could see in the past. Yeah, but I think EU should be very careful in not having double standards. Yeah, so we're running out of time.
Yes, Frau von Cramon, I think you have to go now. Thank you very much for joining us. Very, very interesting, and hope to see you soon again here at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Maybe the last word then goes to András to address the point made by General Wittmann.
Thank you, General. Just in short, in order to spare time, Russia is clearly running low on precision-guided ammunition, particularly regarding cruise missiles. However, the recent strikes on Monday and Tuesday illustrated that even though stockpiles are running low, Russia still has some of these missiles and is ready to use them against Ukrainian targets. So the problems are there, but so far Russia still has some of them at least still functioning, and Moscow is willing to kind of waste them on Ukrainian targets. When it comes to conventional ammunition, in terms of small arms and light weapons, their ammunition supplies are rich. There are no problems in that aspect. When it comes to artillery shells, the stockpiles are gradually depleting, but Russia still has enough ammunition to maintain the current operational pace of its artillery for a few more months to come. However, Russia's efforts to try to buy ammunition from North Korea and also to devour the stockpiles of Belarus indicate that the existing stocks will come to an end sooner or later. So unlike small arms and light weapons, for which the ammunition supplies are basically unlimited, in terms of artillery shells, there are limits, and those limits are already visible, but we are not yet there. I hope this goes for an answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I have to close today's morning briefing. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Please join me in thanking our panelists, Stefan Meister, András Rácz, and Viola von Cramon, and looking forward to seeing you again next week.